A dark shape is seen in both pictures on the slope, which has become famous as the Grassy Knoll. To the left of the Stemmons Freeway sign and half hidden by a concrete wall. By photogrammetry, iTech has verified it as the figure of a man. Hello, welcome back to my channel. I'm Jess Connell, and if you're new, then welcome. I would love to earn your subscription today. We are going through a Life magazine, which is something we do from time to time. This one is 4 years after the Dallas motorcade where JFK's life was taken. It's Governor Connolly who was in the car with him. He is the other man shot in the car, and he actually received potentially fatal wounds that day and had a series of medical things happen after that. And so this is a focus on Governor Connolly. It says, a contribution to history, Governor Connolly sets the record straight on the fateful visit, why Kennedy went to Dallas, and it also includes photos, unpublished pictures by 9 bystanders, last seconds of the motorcade. This is from November 24th, 1967. Look at that price, so sweet. Let's open it up together. First up, of course, it's holiday time, which we talked about this in regard to the actual event, that I never really thought about it being Thanksgiving, the week right after Kennedy was assassinated. But I have some newspapers here actually from that time, from the Dallas Morning News, and their whole focus that week of Kennedy's assassination was, here's your Thanksgiving meal guide. Now there's other things too, and I actually have a whole stack that I'd like to go through with you guys sometime. It's the week after the assassination of the Dallas Morning News. Anyway, it might bring back some memories for you guys. It has, for those of you who were children at the time, it has various toys, dress up things, building sets. There's some dolls and looks like See and Say was the toy, and then different cloth dolls and feeding babies hungry. So for Christmas, all the toy selections. There's also a Barbie ad. It has the Barbie house, Skipper, Twiggy, a Twiggy Barbie there in the corner. I don't know if you see that. Okay, and now we get to the article itself, Why Kennedy Went to Texas by John Connolly. It says, on the next 17 pages, Life presents 2 insights into the tragedy that took place in Dallas 4 years ago this week. The governor of Texas, who accompanied President Kennedy throughout the fateful visit, sets the record straight on a controversial and widely misreported aspect of the event. Life has previously published the famous Zapruder film showing the actual assassination. Here, on pages 87 to 97 is a portfolio of hitherto unpublished pictures taken by bystanders of the last moments of the motorcade in Dallas and then the return to the White House in Washington. Now, something interesting, I have never heard from anybody ever mentioning this particular edition of Life until this last week, and I have had 2 people mention it in the comments, like, Jess, you need to read this one. So I'm interested because there are apparently things he says that are interesting, and there's also some photographic evidence. I also want to say, it says that they published the famous Zapruder film. We have gone through that on this channel. It was November of 2024, if you want to look for it. It was that edition of Life magazine where they showed all the different frames from the Zapruder film, but you'll remember they left out, I believe, 2 frames, which showed the fatal headshot. And so that's what made it so shocking when, like, I believe it was 11 to 15 years later that they showed the Zapruder film on the Geraldo Rivera show, and people were shocked because they had never seen that part of the I mean, just seeing it all flowing is shocking enough, but then to see the headshot was very shocking. So I'm interested to see what these photos are and what they show, and to walk through that together with you. This article is by Governor Connolly. He says, I might as well be blunt about this. I was not anxious for President Kennedy to come to Texas. For a year and a half, he had sought the trip that ended so savagely on the afternoon of November 22nd, 1963. The national pain and trauma that followed his death have produced the Kennedy legend, and I suppose it is natural that in the growth of the legend, the real purposes and circumstances of his trip have been largely obscured. Now, I want to set the record straight. The fact is that President Kennedy wanted to visit Texas with two distinct purposes in mind. The first was to raise funds. The second was to improve his own political position in a state that promised to be critical in the election of 1964. He wanted me as governor to arrange the trip for him, but for good personal reasons, I had been delaying it. The day came in June 1963, however, when President Kennedy invited me to his hotel suite in El Paso, and I knew I had exhausted my running room. I did not know the president intimately, but I liked him, had served as Secretary of the Navy early in his administration, and counted him a friend. He was cordial, as always, with that reserve which was characteristic of him, and he seemed in a good mood. He had flown from Washington for visits in Colorado and New Mexico and had stopped in El Paso. There had been a motorcade, and now he was turning with easy relish to one of the most practical aspects of domestic politics. For those of you who are across the pond or in Australia, I'll just say, if you don't know, this is my Texas pride coming out, but Texas is the second largest state in the Union. And so the part where Dallas is, El Paso is, I believe, a good, is it 12 hours away? It is far. You have to drive a very long time to get to El Paso. And so the fact that he was in New Mexico and Colorado and then popped down to El Paso totally makes sense. But you can't do that from Dallas. Dallas is a totally different part of Texas. So just a little insight there about Texas. When I walked in, he was smiling lightly, and it was obvious that he had been ribbing Vice President Johnson gently, and I thought with affection. "Well, Lyndon," he asked, "do you think we're ever going to have that fundraising affair in Texas?" The question was directed to Mr. Johnson, but the bite was intended for me. Texas was honored to have a native son on the national ticket, and by the same token, it was obligated to support that ticket financially. So LBJ was a Texan, and Governor Connolly was the governor of Texas. I knew that my delaying tactics, though entirely valid, had brought the vice president some needling. Now he threw the ball to me. "Mr. President," Mr. Johnson said, with a side glance at me, "you have the governor here. Maybe now you can get a commitment out of him." Both men were looking at me, and though they were smiling and it was friendly and relaxed in the room, I was fully aware of the force of the White House. "Mr. President," I said, "fine, let's start planning your trip." To understand what was at stake, some background is in order. The genesis of President Kennedy's trip was pragmatic and quite natural. Campaign funds are the fuel of politics, and it was important to begin raising money before the heat of the 1964 race began. The National Committee was $4 million in debt, and yet Texas, a key state because of Mr. Johnson's place on the ticket, had contributed little since 1960. So the National Party, the National Committee would mean the Democratic National Committee, and they were $4 million in debt at that time, which is no small thing. As we talked in El Paso that evening, I recall the president saying, "If we don't raise funds in another state, I want to do so in Massachusetts and Texas. If we don't carry another state next year, I want to carry Texas and Massachusetts." This was a point of both pride and concern to the president. The national ticket had taken Texas's 24 electoral votes, now 25. So at the time of this writing in 1967, it was 25 electoral votes in the Electoral College by only a minute fraction. So they had won these barely. 46,233 votes out of more than 2 million cast had decided it. That's interesting. And its position had hardly improved since. Mr. Kennedy and Texas enjoyed a special relationship. It had begun in 1956 when Texas strongly supported him for the vice presidential nomination and thus helped convince him that his religion need not be an insurmountable barrier in the great Protestant states. He was the first Catholic president, and that was at the time a controversy because people wondered, would he actually have top loyalty to the Pope and the church, or to America and to the American people? And so, now we don't think about that. But at the time, people thought, well, if you're a Catholic and you have allegiance to the Pope, then where would your loyalties actually lie? So those kinds of debates had been happening, and people wondered if Protestants would support him. And so when he did well, that kind of assuaged people's concerns about that particular question. And then there had been the day in 1960 where Mr. Kennedy offered Mr. Johnson second place on the ticket. I was Mr. Johnson's campaign manager in Los Angeles. This is very interesting. With breakfast forgotten, coffee cups stacked on tables, and the air heavy with tobacco smoke, we had reasoned out the situation. During the discussion, Mr. Johnson said very little. A deliberate, almost somber calm came over him. I had not seen him before so deeply in this mood, but I have seen it often since he has become president. Normally, he dominates any conversation, and all his listeners. He is restless, confident, persuasive. But when faced with a great decision, he changes. He falls silent, almost brooding. He questions without revealing his thoughts. All of his energy appears focused on the decision. As the discussion wore on, we came to understand that Mr. Johnson had no alternative but to accept the vice presidential nomination. He agreed, and thus had forged another link that had bound Mr. Kennedy to Texas. But it had not been an easy decision. I remember Mrs. Johnson in tears at one point. She knew the sense of dismay their friends and supporters would feel. It is difficult now to convey these people's shock. They had committed themselves emotionally and intellectually to Mr. Johnson's campaign for the presidency itself. For him to join Mr. Kennedy at the end seemed like going over to the enemy. Oddly enough, the best expression of the feelings that so many Texans shared had come from an Oklahoman. Senator Robert Kerr, a courtly man and a gentleman, caustic at times but not given to violent expression, burst into Mr. Johnson's suite and shouted, "Lyndon, if you do this thing, I'll personally shoot you right between the eyes." Wow. I have no doubt that politicians actually speak very frankly with one another still, but I think particularly if you consider what the world would have been like in the pre-social media years, when you would know, like, I'm not being recorded by somebody's random cell phone, and they could just be really blunt with each other. That kind of frankness is very funny. I think there's no doubt that the Democrats would have lost in 1960 without Mr. Johnson on the ticket. At home in Texas, however, this fact had a paradoxical result for Mr. Johnson. Texas is essentially a conservative state. General Eisenhower carried it in 1952 and in 1956. It had become fashionable to vote Republican nationally and Democratic locally. That was the case in a lot of places at this time, to have a split ticket. It's interesting because we don't do that anymore in American politics. People tend to vote straight down ticket, all Democrat or all Republican. So it's very different to have been the perception that we're going to vote for a Republican for the national ticket for Eisenhower, but we're going to vote Democratic for the Texas positions. A great many Texans had been for Mr. Nixon for president and Mr. Johnson for senator. LBJ had been the senator in Texas, and their favorite senator had tipped the scales against their presidential favorite. So because they liked Johnson, they went for it. Mr. Johnson actually ran two races in 1960, one for vice president and the other for his old Senate seat, and he polled 138,000 more votes for the Senate than he did for vice president. Very interesting. These people had not forgiven Mr. Johnson for joining a man they considered his junior in experience and ability. And they continued to resent his having relinquished real power in the Senate for the weaker vice presidency. Yes, the vice presidency holds no power. The only power you have a little bit of power as a tie-breaking vote in the Senate. And then barring that, it's just the level of influence you have with the president, which usually is very small, and whatever they happen to assign to you. So that would be a step down. His position in the Senate had been a long-standing Senate seat where he had influence, high-level committees, high level of power. In the spring of 1961, Texas had sent a Republican to the Senate for the first time in 84 years. Wow. I had returned to private business in Fort Worth after the 1960 campaign, and then President Kennedy appointed me to head the Navy. But in late 1961, I came home to run for governor. My opponents immediately tagged me with a mean slogan, LBJ, Lyndon's Boy John. The irony here was that the vice president had urged me not to run. He was always oriented to federal service, and I remember him saying bluntly, "Well, I think you're crazy to give up a cabinet post." He predicted that I would be branded a tool of the administration. And indeed, in the general election in the fall of 1962, so unpopular was the Kennedy administration in Texas that my Republican opponent hardly ran against me at all, but against Washington. There was no appropriate time in 1962 for me to host a presidential visit, and I had continued to ignore as best I could the barrage of hints coming down from Washington that the president wanted a Texas visit. Well, this makes a lot of sense, actually, because he was brand new governor in 1962. So 1963 is not an awful long time to wait to host the president if you're still trying to establish your own identity as the governor. They began early in the year when I had just started my own campaign in the first primary with 6 candidates, including the incumbent governor in the race, and my first poll giving me only 4% support. In Texas, one-party politics, you must understand, we don't have a powerful party structure that raises funds and focuses support. Every Democrat runs on his own, builds his own organization, raises his own funds. I was desperately trying to pay for my own campaign and to rally support. And the last thing I wanted was a national attempt for support or political money. The urgings from Washington had continued through 1962. I finished first in the primary, won the runoff, and then the general election. Then I had a bare 60 days to assemble a staff and prepare for a legislative program, which I had to see through in early 1963. That is crazy. My goodness. I had not intended to delay President Kennedy indefinitely. We admitted the obligation and knew we would honor it eventually. There was nothing to prevent him from visiting Texas. Obviously, he could have come whenever he chose, but he wanted me to plan the visit, wanted me deeply involved in the money raising. I think he felt that I was more in touch with the elements from which he needed help than any other man in Texas. And he did need help, for though it is largely forgotten now, the whole country did not consider President Kennedy very successful then, which is ironic because he had the highest presidential support of the last 6 or 7 decades. His support never dropped below, I believe it said 59% was the lowest he ever got, and he enjoyed support up into the 80s at various points in his first and only term as president. So for them not to perceive him as very popular is interesting because he was incredibly popular for a president holding that position. You just automatically are a lightning rod. And so for him to have that was extraordinary, but for them not to recognize it is interesting. The disenchantment with the administration was not limited to Texas. The president had recovered somewhat from the Bay of Pigs, but it had not been forgotten. He had stirred people with his elan and his eloquence, and he had brought a renewed sense of purpose and a quickening of interest in culture and government. But his programs were stalled in Congress, which I think felt no mandate from the people to pass them. That meant that although his plans were fine, his results were slight. This was recognized widely then. A Gallup poll in October 1963, so the month before the assassination, put him at his lowest ebb. I think that's 59%. And David Lawrence quoted the president's own fears of defeat. James Reston of the New York Times thought those fears unreasonable, but reported doubt and disappointment among the voters, adding that, quote, people don't quite believe in him, end quote. And he had alarmed business. This was reaction partly to his handling of the steel price rollback. but even more to his concept of the need for change. People are cautious of change in comfortable times, and businessmen particularly so. Businessmen were suspicious of him, and though it irritated him and he thought it unwarranted, it was still true. What's more, while the trip represented work, trouble, and some risk for me, I also knew that I could expect little of the benefit that state officials usually get from a president's prestige. Many of the people who were Mr. Kennedy's most active supporters in Texas also tended to support my opponent. Many of my most active supporters did not lean towards Mr. Kennedy. To rally new support for him and to raise funds, therefore, I would have to appeal to my supporters, literally to expend my political capital, while knowing that in the election of 1964, in which I too had to run again, many of Mr. Kennedy's supporters would be fighting me. On the other hand, if I couldn't rally support for my own party's president in my own state, it would be a political embarrassment that I would not be allowed to forget. And now we get to the first of the photographs. I think first I'll show you, they have this interesting little 3D model here that shows Dealey Plaza. Very, very good little drawing. It says, at about 12:30 p.m., President Kennedy's motorcade came down Main Street in Dallas. The drawing locates his car turning toward the book depository, showing last letters of Hertz sign on top. Right. So this right here is the book depository. This is the direction the motorcade came, then had to turn down Elm and go down for the fatal shots. So we get to see these photos from the corner. Phil Willis, a real estate man, took this photo. So this is looking back towards the city. It's before they turned onto Houston. So there's the motorcade, and you can see the president there. His head is in the light. You can see the police escorts there. And then here we have the photo of them turning onto Houston. It says carrying the Kennedys and the Connellys. And LBJ is behind him. So this is a rare last photo of Kennedy and Johnson together. You have Kennedy in the front car, and then you can see Johnson's head back in the rear car. Very interesting. Very interesting. You can also see that's the front Secret Serviceman on the car immediately behind them. Unique view of the depository and a window from it. So this photo is the back of the motorcade turning the corner, and there is the fateful window right here. This is the 6th floor, actually. That's the 5th. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, that's the one that's cracked open. Phil Willis, whose pictures appeared on the preceding page, was one of 9 amateur photographers whose pictures of the last 40 seconds before President Kennedy's assassination and its immediate aftermath are published here for the first time. The FBI has seen almost all of them and found nothing that would furnish clues to the assassination itself. Mere chance ruled that what was photographed and what wasn't. Sorry, the print is sometimes a little faint. Mrs. Elsie Dorman worked as a mail supervisor in the book depository. Her form can be seen on the opposite page in a window 2 floors from the top and 6 windows from the right. So is it meaning that one? From which she took the movie sequence that's here. So that's coming toward. So she is getting them as they were coming toward the book depository. That's these shots right here, which I don't believe I've ever paid attention to. Elsie Dorman. It says the window where it was established that Lee Harvey Oswald waited is at far right on the top floor, right there. Boxes behind which he presumably was hiding are visible. The picture at right was taken by Robert Hughes, a customs agent. In it, the Kennedy car has turned onto Elm Street, its front hidden by spectators. So that's the corner of the turn onto Elm. From her window, Elsie Dorman took these pictures at left of the approaching motorcade. Exactly 2.4 seconds later, Robert Hughes took his. It says that after studying it, iTech Corporation, a photo-optical electronics firm, concluded that the object in the window at top right was not a person. To get a good view, the family of civil engineer Jim Towner came an hour early to the motorcade route and stationed themselves at the corner of Houston and Elm, directly across from the book depository. Towner remembers noticing people in some of the depository windows, one of whom he now believes was Oswald. As the presidential car slowly turned the corner, just 25 feet in front of them, past the Dow Tex building, Towner took the picture below. Meanwhile, Tina, the Towner's 13-year-old daughter, was using a movie camera to film the procession passing in front of the book depository, sequence at right, up to within moments of the first shot. She stopped when all she could see was the rear of the president's car. At the sound of shots, she shouted, "Some dummy is lighting firecrackers." But her father, an experienced rifleman, knew better. He sprinted down the motorcade and took one final picture, which we get in a moment. But here is his famous photograph where Jackie looks so content. This photo always makes me so sad. I'm sure it makes many of you sad too. Just, you can see the crowds looking on. It looks like some of them are saluting. There's people who are there. Governor and Mrs. Connolly are waving. JFK appears to be half smiling, but Jackie just looks so content there. And then here are the video footage pieces. I went back actually yesterday or the day before. Somebody told me about the Towners. There is an oral history from the two of them, and then an additional one from her. Sixth Floor Museum website has those oral histories, and so she gives her story, and then there's another one where they're sitting together with her mother, I believe, and they give their account of that day. But these images actually show, you can also see what they called the ostrich egg helmet, and you can see the start of the concrete that's in that facade before you get to the Grassy Knoll. So that's interesting. That's getting so close to the shots. Ooh. Hugh Bensner and Phil Willis each took a shot. Their two shots show the full view of the Grassy Knoll and the trees. They're almost identical. One of them is black and white, which this helps me because when I have looked up this photo, I have noticed that one of them is black and white and one is color. And I assumed that this was just a colorized version of that photo because it's always zoomed in. I never saw this man up front here. And I just have always thought like, oh, I guess that's the same photo. It is not. It's two photos. They have also, you can see the old Stemmons Freeway sign that was removed shortly after this. Some people said that there was gunshots through it. I haven't ever seen photographic evidence of that, but these two show the Grassy Knoll. I will say there is a suspicious dark place there in the corner, isn't there? Do you guys see that? Especially in this one, it strikes me as very dark and odd. What do you think? You can see Abraham Zapruder standing here. I'll see on this one. There he is. I suppose that's his assistant next to him. But people, you know, Jean Hill and Mary Moorman were over on this side and taking a photo. And they have Mary Moorman's photo has a different angle of the Grassy Knoll. But this shows the state of things immediately before the shot. You can see the people holding up their hands, and you can see actually Umbrella Man, I will point out to you, in both of these photos. So in this one, you can barely see the tip of the Umbrella Man. Do you see that? His umbrella standing there. Some people believe that Umbrella Man was some sort of signal giver to, if there were multiple shots, for triangulation, because it was such an odd thing for him to be out there on a sunny day with his umbrella. And then on this one, you can see Umbrella Man standing there behind the sign. So there he is. But you've got Mr. Zapruder up on the pillar. You have the Secret Servicemen lining here instead of on the back of the car, because what one of them said in his account was that Mr. Kennedy had wanted to be seen. So you have the Dallas police in formation close. I want to point that out too, because some people have indicated, oh, the Secret Service was held way back. They were way far away. Well, in this photo, just taken seconds before the shot, they're on the bumper, and there are the policemen right there. So they were not crazy far away. In fact, this one shows the bumper even closer. Look how close their bumper is to the car in front. So that's insightful. Well, this says, the crowd was thinner, but no less enthusiastic as the president's car moved down Elm Street into Dealey Plaza. A security car with Secret Servicemen riding in it and standing on its running boards was only a few feet behind. Phil Willis, after taking the pictures shown on page 87, had cut across the open plaza in time to take the picture above. Oh, so Phil Willis, who took the other photos of them coming down Main, took this one here. So that's interesting. It says a fraction of a second earlier, from a position near Willis, Hugh Betzner Jr. took an almost identical picture. That's the black and white we've been looking at. In the Willis picture, the president can be seen to the right of a motorcycle cop. Right there is the president. In the Betzner picture, he is visible, but the rest of the car is blocked out by the man in the foreground. So there's President Kennedy's head immediately below Stemmons Freeway sign. And just for your perspective, if you're not familiar with this, that Stemmons Freeway sign is the sign from which, on the Zapruder film, Jack Kennedy comes out like this from behind that sign. So that's the back of the sign that we're seeing in those frames where we see him, he's fine, everything's fine, then there's the sign, and then he comes out like this. So from that perspective, you can see this would have been just taken a fraction of a second before the shot, because of how we know he comes out from that position. If you draw a line between Zapruder and President Kennedy, that's almost just a second before the shot. iTech, using a technique called resectioning to determine the time of exposures, computed the president's car to be 5 feet farther along Elm Street in Willis's pictures than in Betzner's. Similar analysis places the time of the Willis picture as just before the first shot. This color one is just right before. Very interesting. This is interesting. I didn't know it said this. Let's get into this. A dark shape is seen in both pictures on the slope, which has become famous as the Grassy Knoll, to the left of the Stemmons Freeway sign and half hidden by a concrete wall. By photogrammetry, iTech has verified it as the figure of a man. Previously published photographs taken at the moment of the fatal shot show that by then he had joined 2 men seen in Willis's picture standing behind a lamp post at left. There is no evidence to indicate he was anything more than an onlooker. Okay, I have to tell y'all, it says to the left of the Stemmons Freeway sign and half hidden by a concrete wall. Now, I see 2 figures there, actually, in the place that they are describing, and I will point them out to you. One is potentially this black figure, and the other is this lighter point. And those are the only places of deviation behind that fence. And they do say, beside the Stemmons Freeway sign, half hidden. Now there's Zapruder, so we're not talking about here, we're talking about to the left. So it would be there or there. And they're saying that iTech, through photogrammetry, has verified this as the figure of a man. And then we have this one, and they are saying, but see, I still see the black figure, and there is still that light color right there. But they are saying that that person has come down and joined two men standing behind a lamp post at left. Oh, okay. So he's saying it would have been that person there. So that is what they are saying, which I have not ever heard that identified as a person. I will also point out, just for your interest, that next to Umbrella Man, there is a group of men there who all seem potentially together in the way the groupings are at this point. And Umbrella Man and one other person sit down immediately after the assassination. There is a video footage of this, and they act very odd. And one of them appears to have a short wave walkie-talkie radio with a long antenna on it. Very odd behavior immediately following the assassination when everyone else is running around. You can also see the young family, I believe that's them standing there, that was videoed and interviewed later. You know, it's interesting. I wonder how many people had been there that day and then only at this point are seeing photos of themselves. That would be pretty fascinating, to have been one of those onlookers and then suddenly see proof of yourself standing there. It says there's no evidence to indicate that the person behind was anything more than an onlooker. So that's what we have there. After the shots were fired, several bystanders kept on taking pictures. In their photographs, some spectators ran for cover, while others ducked to the earth and shielded children with their bodies. Oh, there we have that. That's very interesting. I've never seen some of these shots. So this one shows the motorcade going under the underpass. This shows the backside of the Grassy Knoll, which we've talked about before. There was the means to get up onto the bridge there just by kind of skittering around right there. So there we have that look, which I've never seen these photos. That's very interesting, of the motorcade getting away. And then this shows the Grassy Knoll. It shows the family on the ground there. It shows the policeman. I don't know if that would be Abraham Zapruder. It doesn't look like he's up on the pillar anymore. And we have the concrete, but this is not visible. Panic after the shots, but some cameras keep going. So here is the look at the Grassy Knoll. And if you look, the men have sat down here. That's the video, the photo that I just sent the video about. But then back here, I don't see the dark figure anymore. I do still see the light figure, but the darkness is completely gone. Isn't that interesting? Some people reported seeing smoke and fog hang under the trees there. In fact, if you go to that Helmer Rehberg, there are at least half a dozen, but I want to say closer to 12 or 15 accounts of various individuals in Dealey Plaza or behind Dealey Plaza, and some of the onlookers on the bridge saying that they saw smoke or fog hanging under those trees there immediately following. So there you get the sense of the chaos, though. This cop is running with his gun. Different cops are in different positions of responsiveness. Now this one is a famous shot of the Grassy Knoll. It shows actually Jean Hill and Mary Mormon are there on the ground. There's policemen driving. There's one motorcycle cop who's just parked his car out in the middle of the road there. We have the family laying on top of their children. There's people running toward the Grassy Knoll. Here it says the confusion and fear that gripped spectators moments after the shooting were caught by Wilma Bond. So now there's a Continental Trailways bus coming through, and you can see the whole structure of the concrete there toward the Grassy Knoll. And then here we have a really good shot of the Grassy Knoll with Jean Hill staring on. We can see her very clearly. These are the clearest photos I've ever seen of this aftermath. Very fascinating. You can actually see in this photo, there's a cop who's already made his way up to the corner there. There's various people running toward that area. people running up toward this area as well. And everyone seems to be staring and moving toward that direction. It says, in their photographs, some spectators ran for cover while others ducked to earth and shielded children with their bodies. Police with weapons drawn rushed toward the crest of the Grassy Knoll. Some witnesses believed shots had come from there, a belief the Warren Commission discounted. Patsy Pascal, a court clerk, was taking pictures from a window of the courthouse at Houston in Maine. So those are her top photographs there. She had stopped photographing the procession after it passed her vantage point. Hearing the shots, she started up again in time to photograph the president's limousine as it went under the railroad pass. So that's what she got, and started to emerge from the shadows. Mark Bell, a postman standing in the plaza, photographed a policeman running toward the overpass. And Jim Towner, who had taken a picture before the shooting, took the one at bottom left of press cars following. So this one is the Towner's photograph. The confusion and fear that gripped the spectators after the shooting were caught by Wilma Bond of Dallas. In this sequence, a few frightened onlookers have fallen to the ground as police have started to move toward a picket fence on the knoll. One officer has hopped off his moving cycle. In the two pictures above, he can be identified by his white helmet reaching the top of the knoll and climbing the abutment behind the Fort Worth sign. So that is the one. So that officer left his cycle, ran up there, and went there. He is the one that we identified there. So that's that officer who just dropped his cycle in the middle of the road. I knew that one had tried to drive up the Grassy Knoll and eventually dropped their cycle on the hill. I didn't realize that someone had stopped in the middle of the road. And then they have the final photos of the casket going up at Love Field and the reception back to the White House. It talks about the East Room. It talks about Bobby and Jackie. So I am realizing there are many pages left of Connelly's description of the trip. And so in order to go ahead and give that a good reading, I am going to stop here. We will rest our minds on those photos and on the political information we were given about the trip. And next time we will actually get Connelly's inside look about the planning of the trip. So I think that's going to be great. I hope you'll come back for that. There's this one photograph that I just want to share with you guys at the end of the article. It says, with Governor Connolly and Vice President Johnson, President Kennedy speaks in Fort Worth hours before he was killed. So there are the three of them together. We will leave our talk on that point, but come back next time and we will hear about the planning and then all the way through the moments of the motorcade. So come back for that. I'll look forward to hearing from you. Let me know in the comments what you thought of a lot of these photos, of Governor Connolly's early understanding of the desire for the trip. Lots of things to think about. I want to hear about it in the comments. We'll see you there. Bye.